Very good, very good day, colleagues and friends. And thank you so very much for this invitation. My dear friend Paul, as you stated in your introductory comments, we go back 40 years when, as young academics, we started our journey in the history department at the Mona campus of the University of the West Indies. I was teaching economic history of the Western world, and you were bringing the economic history of the African world, and we met there and we became comrades. I celebrate you once again for this intellectual intervention, because I have long respected you as an activist scholar. And it is that sense of activism, which we both shared, that drove us inexorably from being young historians to being vice chancellors, because we believe that we ought to do something about our research, our knowledge, and we should participate in the management of the environment within which we operate and use our research, our experience to help to shape the institutional world of higher education and to commit to a progressive development of the world. This book emanates from that pedagogical perspective of self and scholarship. It is within that paradigm that you have erupted once again with this magnificent literary intervention. When I heard Amina speak about even your intervention in the feminist discourse, and I reflected upon the fact that my first major book was about the enslavement of African women in the Caribbean. And again, we were on the same intellectual trajectory that took us in the same directions. But this magnificent book that speaks to the repositioning of Africa in and of itself, and within the context of globalization, is extremely timely. It required someone of your intellectual stature as well as your experience, having lived on all sides of the Atlantic and knowing it so well, that you were able to forge this conversation within postmodernity. The globalization paradigm and its logical consequence, which is the reparatory justice movement, you fully understand how dialectically these things interact. And your essays demonstrate the extent to which you are a dialectician within the context of analyzing historical forces. How else can you explain that Trumpism would follow the eruption of Obama? It is important to see these processes as one and the same, different features of the same paradigm. In other words, you remove mystery from phenomena and place phenomena on the table of scientific inquiry. Certainly, any scholar of quality would have realized that a Trumpism would inexorably have followed Obamaism. It is the dialectics of the evolution of the structures of society, how those structures can, at one moment, prepare for a progressive advancement, and then the dialectical forces prepare for a return to the prior order. And this is how we know that the modern world has evolved. And this is why there is a conversation about whether or not we can, using the dialectical method, understand the movements of the world at any moment in time, and in particular Africa. You do not use the language of the phase 2 of Africa's modern nation building, but it is there. Many of the countries are now 60, 70 years into this modern phase of nation building, and they have Africans have created very effective societies out of a disturbing and disruptive historical past. It is almost miraculous how Africa has been able to rise up from the slaughter, the slave trading, the violent colonization, the brutalization of people, the denigration of Blackness and the beauty of it, and how they have been able to do that, to build nations that are viable and giving their citizens opportunities to thrive. But there are contradictions within the process. There are legacies that continue to haunt the process. And all of these have now been highlighted in this age of recentering Africa around a new global thrust, and how the Western world is once again thinking about Africa and its resources, and how Africa's political leadership in many countries have capitulated to those interests, and as a result, undermining their internal processes of change or transformation. It is indeed a dialectical process. And so, yes, you interrogate the texture of Africa's political leadership and what is taking place on the ground in communities around the discourse of development. As a scholar, of course, you could not avoid engaging in the higher education process. What drives the relevance of education? What drives the relevance of research, and how that research ought to be the evidentiary basis of policy? And again, the frustration of the scholar within the context of policy formation and the role of the state, and how in many societies, the principal paradigm is citizens versus state. I recall this very well when I went to Durban, South Africa in 2001 to lead the Caribbean delegations to discuss reparatory justice. And that was a classic case of the dialectics of citizens versus state. In that global conference on reparations, the civil societies of Africa, the church, the trade unions, the students, the academia, all of those civil society organizations came to Durban to support the reparatory justice movement, to support the leadership the Caribbean was provided on this subject. But at the same time, while the civil society organizations were supporting reparatory justice, every African government, every state, every president came to Durban to reject the Caribbean initiative around reparatory justice, and to vote with the Europeans against the Black people of the diaspora. And so we had the leaders of Africa and the leaders of Europe coming together to suppress the reparatory justice movement. But at the same time, in Africa, the civil society organizations and leaders and scholars and all of the civil society groups were saying we were standing with the Caribbean on this. We were standing with the diaspora, while their governments were standing against us. So we understand the dialectics of this process, and this is very important for understanding the context of Africa and the 21st century disruptions. I join with you, my friend, in celebrating the work and the scholarship of Ali Mazrui, who has given us a perspective on African civilization and its vitality and relevance to the 21st century and beyond, and how humanity will benefit in the end fundamentally from the cosmologies and the epistemologies erupting from African civilization that will help to shape this 21st century. And this is very important. This is a good place to end. And of course, and Thandika, who I admired, I met him when I first went to CODESRIA back in the late 80s, and he was there. And I spent some time there in Dakar. And I too celebrate with you and remembering his scholarship and remembering his philosophical underpinnings. This book then is extremely timely. It is indeed a kind of manifesto vision for how to look at this 21st century. At that same conference where I spoke at Durban, and I found myself sitting alphabetically, Beckles, and on my left was Arafat, and on my right was Castro. And I remember sitting between these two giants and saying to myself, what am I going to say when I go to the podium? I went to the podium and I said, the 21st century is going to be the century of global reparatory justice, and it's going to be the greatest political movement of the 21st century. And this was dialectically based on what we knew before, because we knew that it took us all of the 19th century to uproot slavery from the world, chattel slavery. It took all of the 19th century, from Haiti in 1804 to Brazil in the 1880s. Then it took us all of the 20th century to translate Black freedom, Black legal freedom, into human rights and civil rights. It took us all of that, from Marcus Garvey through to Malcolm X, Martin Luther King to Nelson Mandela. It took us all of that 20th century to get our human and civil rights enshrined. And then I said the 21st century is going to be the century where we translate that into reparatory justice for all the crimes that have been committed against Africa and its people. And that this is dialectically sound. This is a projection of historical forces. This is the century where oppressed people of modernity, all of those people who have had their resources plundered and their nations destroyed, this is going to be the century where all of them globally will rise up against the crimes of modernity. And this book gives us the framework, gives us the understanding of why this is going to be so. And it is not only an intellectual tool, it's evidence of the legitimacy of the argument. And so, my brother, I thank you again for this contribution out of the consciousness of a scholar who is also a higher education administrator, who is also a humanist, who is also a global civil rights icon. We thank you for all of this. Continue to write. This is volume 1. Give us the second volume as soon as you can. Thank you so very much. And it's a pleasure to be with you here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Beckles, for your intervention.